So what was great for me was that I could start to break up my understanding of the data in my organization, first by using a data catalog or a data dictionary to understand where my account numbers were, my PI. I battled a bit with child PI because, you know, in some cases, I don't have an age. So I wasn't always aware of that. And then, so I'm now able to go through my entire database looking for evidence or looking for elements of this in all my databases, so I could build a data catalog. The next step then is the processing of that, and that's almost where we get into the data flows / the business process / applications, and you can now start analyzing by data flow. And if you've got a data flow that's moving data and you've got underlying data that's in one of these brackets, that's when the warning bells start to come up. So this was really helpful for me to start segmenting and understanding what to look for in my database. And in my ETL flows or my movement, whatever it is, I could start building that. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yeah, great. Perfect.
Okay. All right.
Cool. So I'm not going to speak much to the rest of the slides. This is more so that when you are reading the slides tomorrow or whatever, you know, when we publish the slide deck, I've already kind of covered this, but just to orientate you on what I put in there. How do you assess? How do you assess risk when it comes to privacy? First thing, first thing is your privacy profile. So when you talk about your data subjects, who are they and what do they look like and what types of information do you have about them? The important one is which legislation applies. If they live in, or if they are present or located in the EU, GDPR applies. If they are located in California, the California Law Act applies. If they're in Australia, you get the idea. So you first of all just understand what legislation you're dealing with. That's quite important. And I also wanted to say that your third-party suppliers are also your data subjects. You need to know where they are because you need to know what risk they carry for you, but you also need to know where they are because they're your data subjects. So make sure that your accounting department is including the location, the country, in the vendor register in your accounting system. It very often gets left out. But if you had that information in your accounting system, you could pull a list of all your vendors in the accounting system and you will know where they are. Okay, next one. Okay, so then worrying about account numbers, I've given you a breakdown of what it is you need to worry about. Okay, so like, I know it just sounds very vague. What do you mean account numbers? Well, account numbers in POPI are defined as any number that gives you access to funds. So anything that has money attached to it. So yeah, and they don't define what they mean by account number, if they mean the PIN number or if they mean the PIN and the account number. But in general, I'd say things like credit card information. So what I've put in there is I said, look, apply PCI DSS, the payment card industry data protection. Use that because it does help with POPI as well. Okay. So that's just some guidelines and some ideas. I think it's fairly self-explanatory. I don't think I have to talk it through. You can ask me later if you want to have questions. It's not exhaustive, by the way. This is my kind of off the top of my head what I would recommend. Next one. Okay, risk type 2. What are we doing? Identifying, classifying unauthorized processing. So what I did in other organizations that I was contracting into is I did a survey and I sent it around to the whole business. And I basically used that weighting criteria and I sort of said, are you processing account numbers? Are you processing account numbers and you don't know why? Are you processing information about children? Do you have any health information? And I basically literally just went through a whole survey with them. And then that helped me to prioritize which departments I should worry about first. Also bear in mind that the IT systems is not where all of this data lives, but fortunately for you, you don't have to worry about that. And then PIIA data flows. What is a PIIA? POPI says that you have to do a personal information impact assessment. Personal information impact assessment. GDPR calls it a privacy impact assessment, and there's a whole body of knowledge around what a privacy impact assessment is. There's also an ISO standard, and I think I've got a meetup about that at some point. If you say, yeah, enjoy my meetup, I'll tell you all about it. But they're literally a risk assessment that says what is the risk that we are posing to the data subject. So one of the ways you can mitigate type 2 is when you know where you are dealing with special personal information or information about children, you could start applying PIAs. I gave you a few gotchas there that I learned along the way. Integration layers, APIs, plugins, extensions, apps, bots, machine learning. You really want to understand the black boxes. You can't have any black box processing where you don't understand what they do with the data and where they send it. Cookies, pixel tracking, especially, so re-advertising. Yeah, very, very risky with re-advertising. Hardware endpoints. I have a very interesting article about cookies, by the way. If you guys would like to get hold of it, I'll tell you about it. Yeah, and then obviously the paper stuff. Okay. Type 3, let's have a look. Sorry, I'm flying through this because I want to give Howard time. Identify and classify risky processing for type 3. Yeah, do a risk survey. Ask about direct marketing. Include pixel tracking in your direct marketing, please. Events. Yeah, these sort of hide. These things hide. You think direct marketing is, oh, well, we don't use SurveyMonkey. No, if you're sending out event invitations, trust me, you're doing direct marketing.
Right.
There's a very broad definition in Poppy.
So,
I'm talking about that tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, by the way. So if you want to know about direct marketing, it's literally like I did a whole analysis of direct marketing.
okay.
Alrighty, so yeah, and then obviously worry about automated decision making. Worry about your data flows. Do your data flows, and that's it really. I think everything else is pretty good. Data breaches. Make sure you can manage data breaches. That was the entire theme of this meetup. Okay, there you are. All right, so I think that's it. Hey, Howard.
There's one more slide.
Where are we now? Oh, okay. I just wanted to point this out to you. This is you can see the reference there. It's how do your risk register at the moment, your risk assurance officer or your risk officer will have a risk register with a risk methodology, and they will have severity or impact of of risk defined in terms of risk to the organization. What Poppy is saying you have to do is you have to define the risk in terms of the risk to the data subject. So you need to add this kind of thing to your risk register, your risk management methodology. Okay, just pointing that out while we're talking about risk. Yeah, cool.
Okay.
That's it.
Thanks, Carol. Are there any questions? Andrew, did you have some questions before we go into the more technical side?
And yeah, just one of the ones that have come out, or that I think is maybe more concerning, is that in terms of email, because it's really easy for people to be able to email, especially within the organization. People, keeping in mind that a data subject can also be a heuristic, so it's not actually limited just to be an actual physical individual.
Yeah.
Somebody can email information. First of all, and you've got a little control over that once it actually kind of leaves your servers. In fact, even a lot of companies don't even know, I mean, if they're running Office 365 or any of the other cloud-based ones, they won't always even know where their email servers and things like that are actually busy sitting. And once it's gone that it's actually left your environment, you've got very little of no control. And it's very easy for someone to have a, email server busy sitting somewhere in an area that's not, covered by the applicable laws and therefore would be in breach of the sort of Poppy Act. And that's one of the things that kind of concerns us a lot. I'm worried that it's a bit kind of light on, in terms of information that leaves. I'm rambling a little bit, but also in terms of the, once you talk about sort of cloud and moving stuff into cloud-based. Certain cloud-based solutions you'll know and be able to say which countries or which data centers you want that to resolve in. But a lot of time you won't, not even just won't know, you won't have control over where that data goes.
Mm-hmm.
And that becomes something difficult to manage and report on.
But that's why you want to be careful. So if you are processing special personal information or information about children specifically, then you really want to start questioning using those cloud systems. It's not to say you can't use them. It's not to say you can't use them. It just means know what you're doing. You know what I mean? Like understand where you are and what is the risk to the data subject.
Yeah, so we've had to be very strict in terms of where we can place our cloud data, but it's also it's problematic because we're having to sort of shut down a lot of potentially really exciting functionality and things we could be doing because we, you know, we're not able to move stuff onto these sort of big distributed platforms like Google's got and things like that.
Yeah, no, it is. It's impactful, and this is what makes a privacy program so onerous. But with the emails, if unless you're sending lots of special personal information about children across email, I wouldn't worry about that first. I would, you know, like I said, I would worry about the cloud information first. Jürgen?
Yeah, thanks, Caroline. I just wanted to share the in terms of risk of the cloud providers, surely they need to accept some kind of accountability in terms of the processing of information. They should also be transparent in what they're doing. I do know in my previous organization, we used to set up a DPAs, data processing agreements, where they disclose, and we agree on what should and shouldn't be done. So surely that's something that we can also aim for with other organizations?
Yeah, absolutely. And then that's the point, right? So the whole point of a privacy program is to get to the point where you have things like DPAs and your authorization boundaries have been very clearly defined. And you know who's responsible at which point and what all, you know, exactly how you're going to handle it. And if it's something you're completely out of control of, then you've got some sort of cyber insurance to mitigate that risk. So but the point is that you've thought about it, that you know what it is, you know, that you know what data it is, you know how much risk you're carrying, and you're making an informed and conscious decision about how much risk you're willing to carry. Yeah. And it's not just the risk of reputational risk to your organization or fines for your organization, or, you know, your CEO ending up in an orange jumpsuit. That's not the real story. The real story is what is the risk to the data subject.
Yes, and also probably if I could add also to Andrew's dilemma in terms of the email. At the previous organization I was with, we were also Microsoft email, and Microsoft actually has a whole classification on emails, and you can actually set up rules in terms of looking for certain patterns of information, etc. So that really helped us to actually narrow down and knowing exactly how much of personal information is actually going via email. And so we started to, just from that point start to just lock down slowly but surely on individuals with training and awareness, etc.
Yeah, unfortunately, the tools are starting to step up. It is becoming better. Cool. But Howard, you've got some good stuff there.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Caroline. Okay, so now let's go into the more technical side. And this is what I've done initially, and I will be working, and we will be extending this and formalizing this a little bit more. I've done it in Visio, but we will start moving it into a tool called Protégé with Evert to build the ontology. And so what I've put here initially was almost the hierarchies and the taxonomies that are required to support this. So one of the things that struck me when after Caroline had put that one pager down there was how much work I could be doing in terms of going through all of my data assets, Excel, SQL, wherever it was, and building an understanding. And I've labeled it as a data catalog, and it's what is the data asset and the appropriate classification. Now, this is not complete because in doing this, I then started to realize that as part of this data catalog, I needed to also add business process that is associated with the data flows. And it's not just that, because there are also manual parts in the business process and then system applications or integration. So this one has developed quite a bit more, but you can start seeing with the processing type. I've also then almost summarized that I had that Caroline presented, and then within the Visio one could then go and drill down quite a bit further. So the level of categorization is quite challenging. And I was quite interested to, I hear Jürgen was talking about in the previous organization, how many people have basically gone through all of their data sets or their databases within their organization and actually done an analysis of what they have and built that in a data catalog. Has anybody got to that level? Anybody doing it?
I think, Howard, I can share this. So obviously this was my previous organization. Yeah, we did start with that. We actually went down into the technical solutions as well. We had Oracle as one of the major systems as well. And Oracle actually has a whole GDPR compliance module,
right?
That really helped us to lock down certain things. But also we started at a very high level in terms of people information, being employee and then customer information that we look at first. So we had a targeted way of just moving down the value chain there.
Yeah. So now you'll find Oracle and all the big database tools are actually doing that for you and allowing you to classify data. So this is an example of, I've just taken one database and I've looked at all my tables, and it allows you to add classifications across the different tables and start to keep this data. And that's where I've been able to start with the data model and start extracting this information. All right, so the tools certainly do support you. There's lots you can do. You can set up your own policies as well, so the way in which you categorize the data, but you have to start with this information. And if you remember, what we're trying to do is build a data model, and this almost becomes our reference data set. And I'll show you an example of what I've done in Excel and then loaded that into the database as well. So just to share with you, this is something that we'll make available. Here is all the reference data elements, so we can see all that data structure that I was showing there in the Visio is now coming out here, right? So there's my data catalog entry types. Am I dealing with a data flow? Am I dealing with a data asset? Have I got the data environment also defined in terms of vulnerability checks and profiling, my business process, and my software asset? So for every single one of these areas, I've built the set of possible options that we've got, okay? And then it starts to look like that. When I bring in my data catalog, I can see for every single table, I can then look at the elements that have been classified. If I don't have any data within that, I just operate at a data asset level, and there's very little challenges on those guys, but I can still collect all of that data. Okay, so that's the sort of structure that we're looking at. And then I wanted to just take a step back and almost say to you guys is that a lot of this information and what we need to work with is sitting with the data architecture responsibility. All right, so there's the enterprise data model. If you've got a data model of all your elements, and you can then be labeling the stuff at the enterprise data model. We have the data value chain in terms of where the data is moving and how we're adding value. And of course, as soon as you get into that enhancing and PI processing that we spoke about, you've got to start being careful and paying attention to your data value chain. So how did you add more information? And then the data lineage and flow, right? So here, as part of the data architecture, they've got to look at the control of the data asset. Now, I'm not sure about you guys, but I haven't been into many organizations where the data architects understand the lineage and the flow across the entire organization, what's coming in, what's going out. But this is what this element of data architecture is trying to deal with. Okay, they need to understand this data movement and the integration across all the different platforms. So you've got to start cataloging it, you've got to start building it. So Jürgen, for example, yes, one thing's looking at Oracle, but that's just the start. You've actually got to start then understanding how the data flows through the organization. And that's probably quite a bit harder than just looking within the data catalog and the data elements itself.
Yes, Howard. I think just to add on to that, this speaks largely to privacy by design. And that's one of the biggest challenges that organizations face, because who has the accountability? Because you have the architecture team, you have the project management team, you have the business teams that are all driving different changes. And to kind of centralize that accountability becomes a challenge that I've seen so far.
Yeah. So you will find, for example, in almost the roles and responsibilities within the DMBOK, they would explain to you that data architecture is responsible for the lineage. Of course, data governance is responsible for compliance and making sure we're dealing with it and making sure that people are looking at it. But the architects are responsible for having an understanding of the entire data dictionary, the entire data model, and the data lineage and flow. Okay, so architects have got to get involved and they've got to start stepping up. Now, one of the things that as soon as I saw this with Caroline, I don't know how many of you guys are involved with BCBS 239. Now, they have done a tremendous value, but just focusing from a risk point of view in terms of preparing what is important about a data catalog and what is important about data lineage and flow. All right. So helpful. These slides will be made available, and I'm running out of time now. I've got 3 minutes left, so I'm not going to. But it's critical for your organization to understand the value of a data catalog. And as soon as Caroline put it down there, I thought that's amazing, because now with my data catalog and with this understanding of where my account numbers are, where my processing is, I should be able to present a visualization to where are we exposed and what is the risk of what we're doing. Okay, so not going to go through all of it. It is important. We talk about critical data elements. I feel now that previously, for example, in BCBS 239, they've got a set of critical data elements that relate to risk within the product and the financial risk. But we should now, with this information, we should be adding or extending the definition of critical data elements to be the PPI and the PII information that we're talking about as well. So you'll find that with most of these implementations, they just say, guys, if you can do anything, just focus on your critical data elements. Don't try model everything, don't try do everything. But we now have to extend the definition of what a critical data element is within the organization. And then here is just some supporting data in terms of what we should be looking at. What is the definition of the element? What is the domain? What is the owner? What are the related relevant business processes, business taxonomy, population rules, products and legal entities? So you can see with BCBS 239, these guys have been collecting all of this metadata already, and now they need to go to another level to ensure that the same thing applies to the papaya compliance. And I really like this picture of saying a data catalog is made up of elements of the data lineage. So we've got the data definitions. That's, everyone understands that to be your dictionaries, but it also contains your data lineage, and it also contains your processes, your business processes. And over and above that, you've got to be bringing in your data profiling and DQ definitions. You've got to understand your data models, your architecture, the business controls, change requests, ownership, and definition. So really almost just a summary of what your data catalog needs to compile and to build a list of. Okay, now this is a whole lot of details about data lineage. And again, I'm jumping around this quickly, but what data lineage is really exciting from a point of view of when you've got your data lineage, you're also able to understand your data quality control points. So as the data moves along, where are you going to implement data quality? And there are different processes and different elements. So we could have it implemented data quality at the source. We could have an insurance of data quality at the calculation, data quality at the transformation, the aggregation, or if I'm going to say there's a pass-through and then the consumption, all right? So there's different elements around that. And So this whole data lineage approach is quite important. You need to design it. You need to explain to the organization what it means to build this. And so these are the sort of 3 questions that we help describe the approach. So what level of lineage are we going to be compiling? Is it just going to be CDEs? Is it going to be the breakdown of CDEs in terms of what data elements make up the CDE? How far back will the lineage go? So think about this, all you guys that do master data. Is it going to go just back to master data, or is it going to go back to the elements that populate the master data? And how far back do we need to go? And looking at our exposure. And then how granular will the lineage be? So that's another one, is to say, guys, am I going to build a data lineage just at a data asset level, at a database level, at a system level? And I know, for example, in one organization almost 8 months ago, we started off just building it at the application level. We said we can't go down to the databases now. So the very first iteration was, let's just get it at an application level and look at the sensitivity around there. All right. So this is now what I've done in terms of taking that Excel definition and building a Power BI data model. So we can see I've got a data flow and I've got the data catalog, and that's being where almost where my data assets are sitting. These are the list of the data assets, and then I've got all of this information, the flow level, the flow type, the processing type, the risk impact, and these are all the hierarchies that we use to join that element up. And this is a breakdown now of my data assets. Okay, so what is the subject area for the data asset or the domain? What is the data catalog entry type, the data classification, the environment, what element levels, who's the owner, what is the data subject, the risk, the type, and then we've got personal information type, we've got the legislation that relates to that, we've got information types and sensitivity. Okay. And this allows me to then build a dashboard or an element to say, well, okay, within my data asset, within my environment, I have one table that has customer information and I have one table that has employee information. And then my risk is I've got a level of high and medium, and I've got residents and non-residents, and I've got the GDPR and papaya legislations that I need to be compliant with. Okay, so there we see we've got 128 data assets, and I've got 2 attributes that are applicable here that I'm looking at. All right, so from there we go to our data flows, and this is just a reporting of the data flow. So by data flow, I can then understand what data assets are involved with the flow, and then what's the impact and the weight. So just to give you a quick demo there in terms of Power BI, here's my Power BI dashboard. So for example, if I choose where are my customer tables and I click on my customer tables, you can see here, I hope you can see that. And if you can't, in Teams, it actually allows you to focus if you'd like to and look at the team. So at my customer, I've got a table there that talks about professionals. So we're building CVs for professionals, and I've picked up the full name and the identification number. Okay, so that's what I'm holding. At an employee level, I've got these elements over here. Sorry. So I've got an email address, a first name, a phone number, and a surname. Okay, so then I can say, well, what is GDPR related? And I can then filter out on GDPR. I've got all this information, and then what's personal information in terms of my classification, what is special personal information, and all sorts of other different areas. I can now start doing the analysis and doing that risk assessment for the risk people. Okay, then when I come into my data flows, I can click on a data flow, and this is almost an ETL where I'm going from my DMBOK database into a data mart, and I can see that I'm moving data professional information, and I've got a civil liability possibility sitting over here in terms of my my risk impact, and then there's my risk weighting that I've got on the side there. And of course, I can then go and analyze the different flows. And the next step that I'd like to build is a heat map where I can show all of these different data elements and information around it. Any questions, guys? Sorry, I know I had to rush. Anything you'd like to talk about, or for me to show you a bit more detail? Andrew, sorry, I didn't hear you.
No, I was just making a comment. I was just saying, I think that looks very impressive.
Thank you. So I mean, it's now just to give you some understanding of what it looks like in the background. Once I've done this classification that Jürgen shared with Oracle, and I was able to declare it, I'm then able to write almost simple SQL queries that allow me to go and look at all of these fields. What it does do is it actually adds extended properties to your tables. So if I look at where's my professional, if I look at my data management professional, and I go and do a properties on that, I can now see that, oh, that's not the right one. I'm not sure where that went to. Oh, okay, I can't find it right now, but basically that tool adds all of this information to your extended properties. And so I can then go and look at, I can do a simple query on my databases with that classification. And here's an example when I run that query. And I'm going to say, give me all of the elements that have classification on them. I'm not interested in everything in terms of all my data assets. So I can then say, there's my information from my database. All right, so this is the database, the schema, the table. What is the asset type? What data elements am I dealing with? What's the sensitivity, PI information? What is the data environment? Is it production? Is it test data? What level am I dealing with? And I can bring out all of that information. And they are my business owners and my subject areas. So there's a tremendous amount of metadata that you're needing to store with your data assets. A little bit harder when it gets to Excel and things like that. And you then have to bring it into a completely different database. But you're then going to have a scenario where your metadata is separated from your data assets. Any other questions?
I just wanted to add that it is very impressive.
Oh, but so there's so much that these tools are giving you. So for example, what I've got here is also data asset audit specifications. So I can now define an asset specification and I can look at all of the audit actions. So I can look at who did the last update, who selected what data, who created these views for data protection, and I've got event times and everything like that. All of this information is available for you to put together. It's just about getting an understanding of what data you require and how you're going to collect this data. Jürgen, is that something similar to what you guys have done or what you did in your past?
Howard, not to the level that you have. This is super complex and exciting. We didn't go to this level.
Okay. All right.
Howard, I'm gobsmacked. I think this is great stuff.
Excellent. So I can, we as we said, we'll share this with you. We'll share the Excel. We'll share I had to share the SQL as well. I think I've got one last report that's sitting on my presentation. So from here, wait. So this is a data classification report from SQL, and you can see he's gone through everything and identified all the different columns. That's what I was able to pull out. And then I've got vulnerability assessments, and I've got all the assessment data. So a lot of this we can pull together and start showing what we need to present to the risk people. And this is just the starting point, right? So guys, we've done nothing fancy in terms of we've had a breach or whatever it is, but if you have this data and then you have a breach for a specific environment, for a specific table, you've now got a lot of the data, right?
Yep.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so exciting. Yeah.
And then also, Di, what I discovered is that a lot of the quality fixes that we're doing, we would like to keep that as evidence as well. So when we almost to an extent, the rules, the quality rules, those type of things that we can bring together, so that we have to be able to show when things happen, what quality are we applying to these different critical data elements. So that starts to pull everything together in terms of saying we are doing these checks for the customer, for the employee, for all this information. When was the last quality rule run on this data element? And we need to just keep a log of that so that we can report on it.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, yikes.
Yeah. But sorry, can I ask a quick question on that? This works
Sure.
really well for the structured data, but things like where we're moving into a lot of the big data stuff where it's unstructured and it's schema on read, how do we go about
So the nice
classifying
thing,
and working with a lot of that stuff?
so the nice thing that you've got is what we can do is there's this aspect called, I know SQL Server does it, and I'm pretty sure Oracle does it, and I'm sure there's I know that certainly in the conferences I've been to overseas, almost 4 years ago, everything was about the big data environment, the data lake. The very next year, everyone was saying, well, the data lake has turned into a data swamp. And if you don't have a data catalog, then you're going to be lost without all this stuff. So most of your big data and data lake providers are providing you with data catalogs. What you've got to start ensuring is that you're collecting the reference data. So is this reference data available, and can you answer that basic question that Caroline put there, is what is my risk weighting of these different data assets that I've got sitting in this data lake? So that is available. If you can't do that, Andrew, what I found is there's something called Polybase in SQL that allows you to map everything from your SQL environment onto all your Excel CSVs, and then you can start putting metadata on top of that. So you can run that schema of what's mapped onto your data lake, you can extract as well in a similar technique.
Great, thank you. Because one of the other challenges is that if somebody puts information out in the public domain and they effectively publish that information or that data can then also be used. So which is, I mean, it's all sort of tangent in terms of what's permissible purposes and that sort of stuff. But it has, resulted in a lot of discussion and debate outside.
So,
yeah. Andrew, I can speak to that if you don't mind, Howard.
go for it.
It's something that's very close to my heart. So yes, public information that is publicly available you can use if the data subject has made it publicly available. However, you do still have to inform the data subject, and all of their rights as a data subject still remain. Okay, so it's the same as justification. Just because I have a legal justification for doing what I'm doing doesn't mean I'm get out of jail free. It means I still have to give effect to the rights of the data subject.
And I'm assuming as well, Caroline, that if I start to do some digital decisioning or automated decisioning, as you said, a lot of the tools are now call it digital decisioning, that automated decision making, or I'm doing enhancement I've got to go through that as well, right? So I can't just collect the data. As soon as I add on and I connect it down the road, then I've got an issue.
Yeah, and the reality is we're not all going to become lawyers or compliance officers overnight and become experts on GDPR or POPI. But what we can do at least is know when there's a red flag.
Yeah.
And escalate it, right? And to say, okay, yes, we've purchased this fantastic system, but it is doing automated decision making, and we need compliance to look at that and assess it.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think, Andrew, that goes back to a little bit, and Jürgen, in terms of that privacy by design, so that when we start seeing these attributes in your enterprise data model and it's mapped onto, these elements are mapped onto the data, you've got to start having the discussion at that time, not when you have the breach.
Yeah, 100% Howard on that.
I think also something that the next step, once you've got this understanding of your data, you can start, you become very valuable. Because let's say, for example, you are having to use a cloud-based system. One of the things where POPI helps is that it says apply the conditions for lawful processing. And those conditions for lawful processing literally help you to stay out of trouble. So if, for example, one of them is minimality, right? So minimize the data to what you actually need for the actual processing that you're actually doing right now, right? And if you are using a cloud platform, then minimize what data you're putting there. So question, like, do we have to put the ID number and the first name and the surname, and if we will put our internal unique identifier be enough?
Yeah. And that's a lovely discussion, because it was almost perfected in PCI, where they started saying, guys, if you store all of the attributes related to the credit card, I'm going to give you a hiding. If you store a unique ID and then you separate all those details from the existing system, then you're starting to do the right thing. And just work with a unique identifier that no one can understand, and you may need to keep all the details around the credit card locally, and so you don't have the potential of exposure.
So yeah, I must say, from my point of view, it's a thing of beauty to see the risk that I've been aware of getting translated into data structures. It just makes me so happy, Howard. I can't explain.
Excellent. We'll get there, one step at a time.
One step at a time.
It's lovely I really hope I can bring that, almost that diagram that you had of all the weightings, and you can put that there, and then you can put the counts of how many of this and how many of that have we got in our organization, and that must bring some confidence to the risk and the audit guys that you aware of what's happening.
Yeah, exactly. And the reality is that the data guys are really the only people who can do this. I know I've dealt enough with compliance officers and risk officers to know that they just have no concept of what could be done on the back end.
Correct. Okay, cool. So we will, guys, remember that this is sort of a community project. We will make the Excel and the data models available, and the Power BI. And I know we've got Connie and Jürgen and Zelda that's not here, that we will start to have a lot more of the data model definitions and that taxonomy working as well. So keep an eye out for that, and we'll keep sharing.